ఏం మనిషిరా నువ్వు?
Chapter 1. Constitutional Framework. The Constitution of India is the supreme law of India. It lays down the framework defining fundamental political principles and establishes the structure, procedures, powers and duties of government institutions. The Indian Constitution is the world's longest written constitution. In its current form, it has a preamble, 25 parts with 448 articles, 12 schedules and 101 amendments. Historical background. The British government started regulating the affairs of India through a series of acts. But their constitutional reforms were not genuinely guided towards ensuring responsible governance in India. Their basic purpose was to control the Indian administration through the office of Governor-General, Viceroy. In this process, the British government never thought to dilute the authoritative position of Governor-General. The provisions inserted through these acts aimed at weakening our national struggle. But at the same time, these acts contained amalgamation of various provisions that led to the foundation of our present Indian Constitution. Some of the major acts and their details are given as under. Regulating Act, 1773. This act was the first step in the direction of the consolidation of British rule and centralization of administration in India. The Governor of Bengal was made the Governor-General of the Company in India, and the governors of Madras and Bombay were subordinate to him. The first Governor-General was Lord Warren Hastings. Black Circle. The Supreme Court was established at Fort William, Calcutta, as the apex court in 1774. 1775. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. Pitt's India Act, 1784. It was introduced to remove the drawbacks of the Regulating Act, 1773. It was named after the then Prime Minister of Britain, William Pitt. It placed the Indian affairs under the direct control of the British government. It created a new body called Board of Control for managing the political affairs. Charter Act, 1833. It is also known as the St. Helena Act, 1833. The beginning of constitution making done the British rule in India is found in this act. It made Governor-General of Bengal as the Governor-General of India, and all civil and military powers were vested in him. First Governor-General of India was Lord William Bentinck. The government of Bombay and Madras were deprived of the legislative powers. British colonization of India was legalized by this act. This ended the actions of the East India Company as a commercial body, and it became a purely administrative body. It attempted to introduce the open competition for selection of the civil servants. However, this provision was negated. Charter Act, 1853. The legislative and executive functions of the Governor-General's Council were separated by this act. It introduced a system of open competition as the basis for the recruitment of civil servants of the company. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee on the Indian Civil Service was appointed in 1854. It introduced for the first time local representation in Indian Central Legislative Council. Government of India Act, 1858. The act transferred the government, territories and revenue of India from East India Company to the British Crown. The powers of British Crown were to be exercised by the Secretary of State for India. That's why the Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet and was assisted by the Council of India, having 15 of its members. The Secretary of State was vested with complete authority and control over the Indian administration through the Governor-General as his agent, and he was responsible solely to the British Parliament. The Governor-General was made Viceroy of India. Lord Canning was the first Viceroy of India. Indian Councils Act, 1861. This act for the first time introduced representative institution in India. Black Circle. It provided that the Governor-General's Executive Council should have some Indians as the non-official members while translating the legislative business. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy, nominated 3 Indians to his legislative council: the Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinker Rao. It initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. This policy of legislative devolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. It also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, Northwestern Frontier Province, NWIP, of Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1866 and 1897 respectively. It empowers the Viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council. It also gave a recognition to the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning 1859. Indian Council Act, 1892. The number of additional members in the Governor-General's Council was increased by the introduction of this act. Additional members in Provincial Legislative Assembly were also increased. It increased the functions of legislative councils and entitled them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. Constitutional Framework. 5. Indian Councils Act, 1909. This act was popularly known as Morley-Minto. Reforms. Lord Morley was the then Secretary of State for India. Lord Minto was the then Viceroy of India. It changed the name from Central Legislative Council to the Imperial Legislative Council. The maximum number of nominated and elected members of the Legislative Council at the center was increased from 16 to 60, excluding ex officio members. It provided for the first time the association of Indians with the executive councils of the Viceroy and governors. Sachendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as a law member. It introduced the system of communal representation for Muslims. Lord Minto came to be known as the father of communal electorate. Government of India Act, 1919. The Government of India Act, 1919 was based to a great extent on the Montagu-Chelmsford Report. It has a separate preamble which declared that the objective of the British government is gradual introduction of responsible government in India. By the introduction of this act, bicameral legislature was established in the centre. The upper house was known as the Council of State and the lower house was named as Central Legislative Assembly. Black Circle. The membership of the upper house was fixed at 60 members while the lower house consisted of 146 members. The upper house was elected for 5 years and the lower house for 3 years. Black Circle's separate electorate was retained for minorities. The system of diarchy was introduced in the provinces. The provincial subjects were divided into reserved and transferred ones. The subjects were divided between the center and provinces. The central subjects were defense, foreign affairs, currency, railway and telecommunication. The provincial subjects included education, health, irrigation and local government. Black Circle. The Governor-General's Executive Council was responsible to the Secretary of State for India who was sitting in London. The Governor-General retained the right to certify any legislation which he considered essential. The Act provided for the establishment of a Public Service Commission, PSC, in India for the first time. Simon Commission was constituted for reporting the condition of India under British. The Commission recommended the abolition of diarchy system and extension of responsible government. Government of India Act, 1935. It provided for the establishment of an All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely states as units. But the federation never came into being as the princely states didn't join it. The Act divided the powers between the center and units by 3 lists: federal list, for center, with 59 items, provincial list, for provinces, with 54 items, and the concurrent list, for both, with 36 items. Residuary powers were given to the Viceroy. It introduced provincial autonomy instead of diarchy in the provinces. It introduced responsible governments in provinces. The governor was required to act with the advice of ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. The provinces were now autonomous units of administration in their own fixed spheres. It provided for the diarchy at the center. Thus, the federal subjects were divided into reserved subjects and transferred subjects. But this provision did not come into operation at all. It introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces: Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam in the United Provinces. There was a legislative council, upper house, and a legislative assembly, lower house. However, many restrictions were placed on them. It was established in 1942 to provide scientific and industrial research and development that maximizes the economic, environmental, and social benefits of India. CSIR's contribution in various domains are enlisted below. Biological sciences. An indigenous drug formulation against tuberculosis called Rhizorian has been developed in PPP, public-private partnership mode, which has drastically cut short the duration of TB treatment. Recently, India's first biofuel-powered flight was initiated with the help of CSIR technology for aviation-grade biofuel. The use of biojet fuel, apart from reducing greenhouse gas emission and sulfur 6. Emission, General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. It also provided separate electorates for depressed classes, scheduled castes, women and labor workers. It abolished the Council of India, established by the Government of India Act, 1858. The Secretary of State for India was provided with a team of advisors. It extended franchise and about 10% of the total population got the voting right. It provided for the establishment of a Reserve Bank of India, RBI, to control the currency and credit of the country. It provided for the establishment of a Federal Public Service Commission, Provincial Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission for 2 or more provinces. It provided for the establishment of a federal court. The Cabinet Mission Plan. Black Circle. The Act provided that all the members of the interim cabinet would be Indians and there would be minimum interference by the Viceroy. It also provided for formation of the Constituent Assembly on democratic principle of population. The Union government and its legislature were to have limited powers, dealing with finance, foreign affairs and communications. The Union would have powers necessary to raise the finances to manage the subjects. Thus, the Cabinet Mission Plan proposed a weak center. A Constituent Assembly was formed by the representatives of the provincial assemblies in the princely states. Each province was allotted a total number of seats in proportion to its population. The Constituent Assembly had to comprise 293 members from the British provinces and 93 members from the princely states. Indian Independence Act, 1947. This act provided for the creation of 2 independent dominions of India and Pakistan from August 15, 1947. It defined the territories of the 2 new dominions and made possible the adjustment of existing boundaries, and the accession of other boundaries was to be done by the Boundary Commission. The Dominion of Pakistan was to have 2 wings, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. East Pakistan comprised East Bengal and Sylhet district taken out from Assam. West Pakistan included the Northwest Frontier Province, West Punjab, Sindh and Baluchistan. The 2 dominions was to have a Governor-General appointed by the King for the purpose of governing the dominion. The act also provided that the same person could be appointed Governor-General of both the dominions. The legislature of each of the dominions is free to make laws for that dominion, including the laws having extraterritorial operation. Black Circle. No Act of British Parliament passed after August 15, 1947 to extend either of the dominions. The lordship of British government over the Indian states lapsed, and with it, all treaties and agreements between Britishers and the rules of Indian states also came to an end. The Indian states became independent in their political relations with the governments of the new dominions. The assent of the Parliament was given for the omission of the royal titles like Emperor of India. Dominion, provinces and other parts were governed in accordance with the Government of India Act, 1935 for the interim period. The provisions requiring the Governor-General or any other governor to act in his discretion or exercise of his individual judgment would cease to have effect from August 15, 1947. The Governor-General was, however, invested with absolute powers until March 1948 to issue orders for the effective implementation of Indian Independence Act, 1947, the division of the assets between the 2 dominions, to adopt or modify the Government of India Act, 1935, and to remove any difficulties that might arise during the transitional period. The Act of 1947 provided for the abolition of the office of the Secretary of State for India and his advisors. The 2 dominions were given freedom to join or not to join the Commonwealth. Initiatives have been made to promote research on development of solar energy-based technologies for both grid-based and decentralized generation and applications. 3. Department of Constitutional framework. 7. The members of the civil service and the judges of the federal court and high courts appointed before August 15, 1947, would continue to serve in either of two dominions and would be entitled to receive all facilities in respect of their remuneration, leave, term, pension, etc. as they enjoyed before independence. Salient features of the Indian Constitution. Constitution of India is unique in itself. Many features of our constitution are borrowed from various sources around the world. That's why sometimes a few people criticize Indian constitution as being a borrowed constitution. Though, we have derived many features, yet we have modified those provisions to suit our need. Hence altogether new provisions have been created and assimilated in our Indian constitution. Some of the salient features of the Constitution of India are given as under. Written, lengthy and detailed. Like the Constitution of the United States of America, Canada and France, India too has a written constitution, though it differs from those documents in many respects. The Constitution of India is very elaborately written, one which makes it the most voluminous constitution in the world. It has been the endeavor of the framers of the Constitution to provide for the solution of all the problems of administration and governance of the country. Even those matters which are subject of conventions in other countries have been put down in black and white. The Constitution of India in original form consisted of 395 articles and 8 schedules. As a result of some amendments made since then, some new articles have been added and some old ones have been repealed. The number of schedules has also risen. However, the bulk of the Constitution continues to remain same. Accumulation of borrowed wisdom of the world. The Constitution makers borrowed suitable and tried principles of other constitutions of the world. The parliamentary type of government has been adopted from England. The Supreme Court in chapter on fundamental rights show the clear influence of Constitution of United States. From Irish state came the inspiration of the directive principles of state policy. The Federation of India is set on the pattern of Canada, where residuary powers are given to the centre. Indian Constitution is thus a blend of many constitutions. Amalgamation of rigid and flexible. The Indian Constitution is partly rigid and partly flexible. The procedure laid down by the Constitution for its amendment is neither very easy as in the case of England nor very difficult as in the case of United States. A constitutional amendment can be initiated in either house of the Parliament. It can be passed by an absolute majority of the total membership of each house voting separately and 2/3 road majority of the members present and voting. But certain parts of the Constitution can only be amended with subsequent ratification by legislatures of at least half of the states. The state legislatures have not been given any powers to amend the Constitution because they do not have separate constitution. In Canada and Australia, both the provinces and the states can amend their own constitution within the federal framework. The socialist aspect of Indian Constitution. The word socialism has not been used in the original constitution, but the essence of the philosophy of socialism is inherent in it by establishment of a society based on equality, economic justice and non-exploitation. The provisions of the Constitution dealing with the preamble of the Constitution, the fundamental rights, the directive principles, the special provisions for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the schedules D and V of the Constitution, aim directly at achieving the goals of the social aspect. Demonstration exercises by technology institutions were supported. Convergent technology solutions for 23 kinds of water-related problems. 8. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. Essentially federal with unitary features. The Constitution declares that India or Bharat shall be a union of states. It provides for a double set of governments. In this set of dual polity, powers are clearly defined and demarcated. The provision that take part in distribution of powers are as follows. Legislators of the center as well as state participate in the election of president under Articles 54 and 55. Demarcation of executive powers between the center and state under Articles 73 and 162. Legislative powers between the center and state are well distributed under the range of Schedule 7 providing Union List 100, State List 61, and concurrent last 52. The upper house, Rajya Sabha, is represented by the states. Compulsory ratification by at least half of the states for amending above provisions. In spite of having substantial federal features, Indian Constitution is strikingly characterized by a host of centralizing features, some of which are as follows. No separate constitution for states. No dual citizenship. Authoritative power of center to change the name, boundary and territory of any state. In addition to residuary power to center. Central law prevails over the state law in conflicting matters of Schedule 7. National emergency, president rule, financial emergency are another examples depicting centralized features. Appointment of high court judges without much say of the states. Appointment and role of the governor is inclined heavily towards center. Common election commissions, CAG etc. are another such features. Indian federalism can be termed as quasi-federal in light of above-mentioned features. Parliamentary system of government. The Constitution establishes parliamentary type of government, both at the center and the state. It follows the British cabinet system with the Prime Minister as the head of the executive of the Union. The real powers are vested and exercised by the Council of Ministers, which is responsible to the legislatures. The President and the Governor are merely constitutional heads. The parliamentary system of government, as in the Great Britain, has been adopted primarily because of the success of this system in England and also because of the political experience of the Indian people gathered from the working of partial responsible governments under the Government of India Acts, 1919 and 1935. Single citizenship. Although India has a federal government, yet double citizenship, as provided for in the U.S. Constitution, has not been provided for. All the Indians, irrespective of their domicile, enjoy a single citizenship of India. Since Americans are considered to be the citizens of the respective state where they are domiciled, and then they are also the citizens of the USA as a whole. In both these capacities, they enjoy different rights and owe different obligations. The principle of single citizenship was provided for in the Indian Constitution in order to foster strong bond of social and political unity among the people of India who were divided on account of race, ethnicity, languages and multiplicity of religious and cultural background. Directive principles of state policy. The directive principles of state policy are another distinctive feature of the Indian Constitution. This feature has been taken from the Constitution of the Ireland. These are the ideals which the state shall strive to achieve as far as possible. These principles are non-justiciable. No legal action can be taken against the state in courts of law if it fails to follow or realize any of these principles. They do not confer any constitutional rights upon citizens, and these cannot be enforced through courts of law as in case of fundamental rights. However, these principles have been made fundamental in the governance of the country. It becomes the moral duty of every government authority to follow them and realize the purpose behind them. Constitutional Framework. 9. Fundamental Rights. Like the Constitution of the United States of America, the Constitution of India also includes a separate chapter guaranteeing fundamental rights to all the Choosins. These rights are justiciable and inviolable. They are binding on the legislature as well as on the executive. If any of the rights is violated, a citizen has the right to seek the protection of the judiciary. Any act of the legislature or order of the executive can be declared null and void if it violates any of the fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizens by the Constitution. Independence of judiciary. Our Constitution established an independent judiciary, absolutely free from the influence of the executive and legislature. The Supreme Court of India has declared executive orders and ordinances null and void whenever they were found to be inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution. Annulment of ordinances with respect to privy purses and bank nationalization are some of the cases where the Supreme Court exhibited its complete independence and neutrality. Balance between judicial supremacy and parliamentary sovereignty. The Constitution of India is a refined blending of judicial supremacy and parliamentary sovereignty. It avoids the extra super authority of the Supreme Court of America, which can invalidate any act of the American Congress on the simple plea of its being contrary to the spirit of the Constitution. This power of judicial review has made the Supreme Court of America a super legislature. The British Constitution, on the other hand, embodies the principle of parliamentary sovereignty. The British Parliament can pass, amend, repeal any type of legislation, good or bad, natural or unnatural, in the Constitution. Courts in England cannot declare null and void any act of Parliament on any ground whatsoever. The Indian Constitution strikes a golden mean by avoiding judicial supremacy of the American type and parliamentary sovereignty of the British type. The Supreme Court have power of judicial review and can stand in judgment over the sovereign will of Parliament in ensuring justice for the people. Parliament is absolutely supreme in the sphere of legislation within the bounds of basic structure of the Constitution. This is how a compromise between the British and American systems has been beautifully executed in the Indian Constitution. Basic Features Doctrine. In the Keshavanand Bharati case, 1973, the Supreme Court propounded the doctrine of implied and inherent limitations along with the doctrine of basic features, which were until now unknown in India. In this case, the majority of judges held that the amending power was a limited one, even though they knew that the legislature was bent upon giving unlimited amending power to itself. The Supreme Court put forward the view that undoubtedly the Constitution does not have any provision for drafting a new constitution, but that does not mean that the legislature can't reshape or restructure the Constitution. It is therefore logical to assume that the implied limitation restricts the legislature in changing the Constitution unidentifiably. An argument stating that Parliament's will is people's will and therefore, Parliament still has an unlimited amending power, is preposterous because the electorate docks nor take into account the constitutional amendments while voting in the parliamentary elections. So what has to be understood clearly is that Article 368 allows the legislature to make amendments only to the extent that the Constitution does not lose its unique identity. The Parliament, by passing the 24th Amendment Act, altered Article 368 to enlarge the ambit of its amending power under that very article. This is a clear violation of the principle of implied limitation. A creature of the Constitution cannot regard itself superior to the. To sum up, the Supreme Court held that the Constitution is not made to suffer a loss of identity through the amending process. The identity of the Constitution is the sum of its essential features. Article 368 cannot be read as expressing the death wish of the Constitution or a provision for its legal suicide. Scientific developments and their applications. 5. Ministry of Earth Sciences. The Government of India reorganized the Ministry of Ocean Development and the new Ministry of Earth Sciences, MPS, came into being on the 12th of July 2000. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. It was held by the Supreme Court that Parliament's power of amendment was subject to implied limitation, namely, Parliament could not amend the Constitution to bring about change in the basic features of the Constitution. Elements of the basic structure. The present position is that the Parliament under Article 368 can amend any part of the Constitution including the fundamental rights, but without affecting the basic structure of the Constitution. From the various judgments, the following have emerged as basic features of the Constitution or elements of basic structure of the Constitution. Supremacy of the Constitution. Sovereign, democratic and republican nature of the Indian polity. Secular character of the Constitution. Separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary. Legislature. Federal character of the Constitution, unity and integrity of the nation. Welfare state, socio-economic justice. Judicial review. Freedom and dignity of the individual. Parliamentary system, rule of law. Harmony and balance between fundamental right and DPSPs. Principle of equality. Free and fair elections. Independence of judiciary. Limited power of Parliament to amend the Constitution. Effective access to justice. Principle of reasonableness. Powers of the Supreme Court under Article 32, 136, 141 and 142. Separation of powers. The doctrine of separation of powers considered the idea that the governmental functions must be based on a tripartite division of legislature, executive and judiciary. The three organs should be separate, distinct and sovereigns in its own sphere so that one does not trespass the territory of the other. The framers of Indian Constitution did not recognize the doctrine of separation of powers in a rigid sense. Unlike the American Constitution, this doctrine has not been strictly applied in the Indian Constitution. It cannot be explicitly seen, but can be witnessed through the differentiation made in the discharge of functions by the different branches of the government in the Constitution. A complete and absolute separation of powers is practically and theoretically not possible. Though, it is always possible to give a broad meaning to this doctrine. The basic concept of the separation of powers would mean that the same persons should not form part of more than one of the three organs of government. That one organ of government should not control or interfere with the work of another. Black circle. That one organ of government should not exercise the functions of another. Democracy and separation of power. The doctrine of separation of powers is an integral part of the evolution of democracy. Democracy dictates a system in which every citizen can, without fear of retribution, express himself and pursue his or her interests. It enables him to live a life of his choice to the extent he does not encroach upon the rights of the other people. The legislature, the judiciary, and the executive are the pillars of democracy. No democracy indeed contemplates conferment of absolute power in any single authority. Therefore, the system of checks and balances is one of the most salient features of our constitutional scheme. Practically, the three organs cannot be segregated into three watertight compartments due to their interdependence on each other to ensure efficacious governance. They have to work in accordance and in consonance to achieve a meaningful sustenance and purposeful progress of citizens. Though the minimum encroachment is always desirable, the conscience of our Constitution speaks through its preamble, and the dynamics of its goal is spelled out in its various provision. The will of the people finds its best expression in the every word as inscribed in the preamble. We the people of India, and do hereby adopt, enact and give ourselves this Constitution. Thus, it is the people who are sovereign, and they exercise this sovereign power in choosing their representatives to the Parliament. Constitutional Framework. 11. Conclusion. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. No organ should go beyond the role assigned to it by the Constitution. It is the obligation of the judiciary, executive, and legislature to adhere strictly. One of the most fundamental features of the Constitution is separation of powers. It is needless to criticize the constitutional plan of separation of powers when the existing provisions are not being religiously followed. There is a major gap between the constitutional plan and practice of separation of powers. It can only be bridged when all the three organs move a step ahead than all the other democracies of the world by working in sheer harmony. The founding fathers of the Constitution had also defined the position and the powers of the three organs of the state. They had realized that government, being an organic entity, would never be able to achieve complete separation of powers. Therefore, aiming for a complete separation of powers is misconception. The spirit of the Constitution is not exclusiveness, but a shared coordination. The executive has grown very powerful in the recent time, which has certainly led to wide misuse of powers. Apart from the check kept on them by the judiciary and legislature, media and NGOs have played a major role in exposing the misdeeds of government functionaries. Ultimately, the aim of the three organs is to protect the rights of the people. In a democracy, vigilant attitude of the people can help ensuring a proper functioning and prevent arbitrary exercise of the power. Therefore, none of the three organs can usurp the essential functions of the organs, which constitute the basic structure, not even by amending the Constitution, and if any such amendment is made, the court will strike it down as unconstitutional. These basic features forms the bedrock of Indian Constitution, which reflects the real spirit and ethos. Now further in this chapter we will discuss various parts of the Constitution. Preamble. Preamble refers to the introduction of the Constitution. Indian Constitution borrowed the concept of preamble from the American Constitution. The preamble of the Indian Constitution is given below. The preamble is the introduction of the Constitution. The preamble of Indian Constitution is given below. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic and political liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly this 26th day of November, 1949, do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. Important words mentioned in the preamble such as sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, etc. reflect the high ideals of the framers of the Constitution, as well as they also reflect the wishes and aspirations of people of India. Components of preamble. Broadly, the preamble reveals following four components of the Indian Constitution. 1. It is the source of the authority of the Constitution of India. 2. It reveals the nature of the Indian state. 3. It reveals the objectives of the Constitution of India. 4. It also reveals the date of adoption of the Constitution of India. General Studies, Mains Paper I. Shared infrastructure for product development and validation, besides providing specific training to address the critical skill gaps in this sector. E. Promoting 12. General Studies, Mains Paper 2. Significance of Preamble. The preamble is very important for the Constitution of India. The preamble has been referred to as the key to the minds of the makers of the Constitution. The important and significant features of the preamble are given as under. The preamble contains the basic philosophy on which the Constitution is based. Black circle, it reflects vision, ideals and aspirations of the framers of the Constitution of India. Some of the important comments about preamble, which show the significance of preamble, are as follows. Horoscope of our Sovereign Democratic Republic, K.M. Munshi. The preamble is the most important part of the Constitution. It is the soul of the Constitution. Professor Thakur Das Bargana, it is keynote to the Constitution, Ernest Baker. Whether preamble is a part of the Constitution. The relationship of preamble with the Constitution and its amendability has always been a matter of debate. The Supreme Court of India has given different judgments in different matters. In 1960, in the Barubari Union case, the Supreme Court admitted that the preamble is key to the minds of the framers of the Constitution, but it is not part of the Constitution. In Keshavanand Bharati case 1973, the Supreme Court observed that the preamble is an integral part of the Constitution. Now, it is widely agreed that the preamble is an integral part of the Constitution. Black Circle doesn't give any authority or check upon legislature. Black Circle, its provisions are not enforceable in the court of law. Whether preamble is amendable. In the Keshavanand Bharati case, 1973, the Supreme Court observed that as preamble is part of Constitution, therefore, it is amendable like any other part. But no amendment can be made to the basic features as mentioned in the preamble. In 1976, through 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, the preamble was amended where words socialist, secular and integrity were added to it. Citizenship. The Constitution of India provides a single citizenship for all the citizens of India. It is dealt in Articles 5 to 11 under Part 2 of the Constitution. These articles empower the Parliament to enact a law related to the citizenship. It led to enactment of Citizenship Act, 1955, which was amended many times subsequently. Acquisition of citizenship. There are 5 ways of acquiring citizenship of India according to the Citizenship Act, 1955. These are given as under. By birth. A person born in India between the 26th of January 1950 and the 1st of July 1987 is citizen of India by birth irrespective of nationality of his parents. However, a person born in India on or after the 1st of July 1987 is considered as citizen of India only if either of his parents is citizen of India at the time of his birth. Those born in India after the 3rd of December 2004 are considered as citizen of India if both of his parents are citizen of India. By descent. A person born outside India between the 26th of January 1950 and the 10th of December 1992 is considered as citizen of India if his father was a citizen of India at the time of his birth. For those who were born after the 10th of December 1992, they are considered citizen of India by descent if either of his parents were citizens of India at the time of his birth. However, the 3rd of December 2004 onwards, a person born outside India shall not be a citizen of India by descent unless his birth is registered at an Indian consulate within 1 year of the date of his birth. Constitutional framework. 13. By registration. A person may get citizenship of India on an application if he falls under any of the following categories. A person of Indian origin who is ordinarily resident in India for 7 years before making an application. A person of Indian origin who is ordinarily resident in any country or place outside undivided India. A person who is married to a citizen of India and is ordinarily resident in India for 7 years. before making an application. Minor children of persons who are citizens of India. Black circle, a person of full age and capacity whose parents are registered as citizens of India. A person of full age and capacity who, or either of his her parents, was earlier citizen of independent India and has been residing in India for 1 year immediately before making an application. A person of full age and capacity who has been registered as an overseas citizen of India for 5 years and who has been residing in India for 1 year before making an application. By naturalization. The citizenship of India can be acquired through the process of naturalization on the following grounds. Black circled that he is not a subject or citizen of any country where citizens of India are prevented from becoming subjects or citizens. Black circled that he undertakes to renounce the citizenship of that country in the event of his application for Indian citizenship being accepted. That he has either resided in India or been in the service of government in India throughout the period of 12 months immediately preceding the date of application. That during the 14 years immediately preceding the said period of 12 months, he has either resided in India or been in service of government in India for periods amounting to not less than 11 years. That he is of good character. That he has an adequate knowledge of a language specified in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. That after getting certificate of naturalization, he intends to reside in India. By incorporation of territory. If any foreign territory becomes a part of India, the government of India specifies persons who among the people of territory shall be the citizen of India. Loss of citizenship. According to the Citizenship Act, 1955, the citizenship can be lost in following 3 ways. 1. By renunciation if any citizen of India of full age and capacity makes a declaration renouncing his Indian citizenship. 2. By termination when any Indian citizen voluntarily acquires the citizenship of another county, his Indian citizenship terminates automatically. 3. By deprivation under this, the citizenship is lost compulsorily on the following grounds. Fraud. If the Indian citizenship was acquired through, if he has shown disloyalty to the Constitution of India, if he has unlawfully traded or communicated with an enemy during the war, if he has ordinarily resided out of India for 7 years continuously, person of Indian origin, PIO, and overseas citizens of India, OCI. The person registered as PIO or governed under the Ministry of Home Affairs scheme. Following persons are eligible for PIO card. Anyone who held Indian passport any time. He or either of his parents or grandparents or great-grandparents was born in and was permanently resident in India. He is spouse of a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin as mentioned above. 2. Impactful policy research in social science, impressive scheme. The Ministry for Human Resource Development launched the web portal of the scheme, Impactful Policy Research in Social Sciences, IMPRESS, in 2018. Under the scheme, 1,500 research projects will be awarded for 2 years to support the social science research in the higher educational institution and to enable research to guide policy-making. IMPRESS scheme will be used to understand and solve problems facing the society. The scheme will be implemented at a total cost of 14. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. On the other hand, the OCIs are governed as per fundamental rights. The Citizenship Act, 1955. Following persons are eligible for becoming OCI. a foreign national who was eligible to become a citizen of India on the 26th of January 1950. A person who was a citizen of India on or at anytime after the 26th of January 1950. He who belonged to a territory that became part of India after the 15th of August 1947. His, her children of such person. Minor children of such person. However, these schemes are not available to the persons belonging to Pakistan and Bangladesh. These schemes allows multiple entries into India without visa. These schemes can be obtained after payment of requisite fee. The voting rights are still not granted to them, but it is under consideration with the government. Merger of PIO and OCI. In January 2015, the government announced merger of these two schemes. It means that PIO category has been withdrawn and new applicants may apply for OCI scheme. Now, the following changes have been carried out. All individuals holding PIO card would automatically be granted benefits of OCI card. New applicants will have to apply for OCI card scheme. The OCI cardholders can apply for Indian citizenship if they stay in India for at least 1 year within the 5 years period of obtaining OCI status. Benefits of merger of PIO and OCI. Considering the presence of socially, ecologically and politically vibrant Indian diaspora across the globe, it is a welcome move by the government of India. It will help India in following manners. Increase in remittances from abroad. More foreign direct investment, FDI, inflow. More political and diplomatic leverage. More tourists in India. The government is also contemplating grant of voting rights to OCI cardholders. But it will take time. The Constitution of India outlines the fundamental rights of its citizens in Part 3 of the Constitution. These are more elaborate and real than those found in any other constitution. These rights are fundamental in the sense that they are superior to all laws, executive orders and judicial decisions. These are called fundamental because while ordinary rights may be changed by the legislature in its ordinary process of legislation, a fundamental right being guaranteed by the Constitution cannot be altered by any process shorter than that required for amending the Constitution itself. Nor can it be suspended or abridged except in the manner laid down in the Constitution itself. According to the Chief Justice P.B. Gajendra Gadkar, a fundamental right is a legally enforceable right governing the relation between the state and the individual. It has both negative and positive aspects. It means a right of liberty permissible under the law. It also means a right of liberty in a positive sense which enables an individual to develop his personality, to live his life in his own interest and in the interest of the community as a whole. Characteristics of fundamental rights. The fundamental rights enshrined in the Indian Constitution possess certain basic characteristics. These are discussed as under. These rights have been placed at a higher pedestal than the ordinary laws. Adequate machinery has been provided to ensure that these rights are actually available to the citizens. These rights are not absolute and are subject to restrictions. While some of these restrictions have been outlined by the Constitution, the others can be imposed by the Parliament according to the requirement of the situations. The courts enjoy the right to investigate whether the restrictions imposed on these rights by the Parliament are reasonable or not. These rights can be suspended during emergency. At such a time, the President can also suspend the right of the citizens to move to the courts for the enforcement of these rights. As over 20,000 youth are awarded PhD and S&T every year in India, the scheme scheme aims to tap this tremendous potential to popularize and communicate science and also to inculcate scientific temperament in the masses. The scheme also carries monetary incentive to each of 100 best entries from Ph.D. scholars in year along with certificate of appreciation besides getting the story published projected mass media. Constitutional framework. 15. The Parliament can make changes in fundamental rights through an amendment to Constitution. Such an amendment, however, requires the majority of total membership of the House as well as two-thirds road majority of members present in voting, so special majority is required for its amendment. Laws inconsistent with fundamental rights. Article 13 declares that all laws that are inconsistent with or in derogation to any of the fundamental rights shall be void. In other words, it provides the doctrine of judicial review. This power has been conferred on the Supreme Court, Article 32, and the High Courts, Article 226, that can declare a law unconstitutional and invalid on the ground of contravention of any of the fundamental rights. The term law in Article 13 has been given a wide connotation so as to include the following. Permanent laws enacted by the Parliament or the state legislatures. Temporary laws like ordinances issued by the President or the state governors. Non-legislative sources of law, custom or usage having the force of law. Thus, not only a legislation but any of the above can be challenged in the courts as violating a fundamental right and hence can be declared as void. Rights. Classification of fundamental. The fundamental rights contained in the Constitution have been classified in the following 6 categories. 1. Right to equality. 2. Right to freedom. 3. Right against exploitation. 4. Right to freedom of religion. 5. Cultural and educational rights. 6. Right to constitutional remedies. The original Constitution incorporated right to property also in the list of fundamental rights. But it was eliminated from the list of fundamental rights by the 44th Amendment, 1978. 1. Right to equality. Article 14. It confers on all individual, both the citizens and foreigners, except enemy, aliens, the right to equality before law and equal protection of the law. Equality before law. It means all individuals are equal in the eyes of law without any regard to the rank or position in society. It also means that all individuals are subjected to the ordinary law of land. Rule of law. It means the predominance of legal spirit in the administration of country, and law should not be subjected to the government, but it should be the government that should be subjected to law. Equal protection of the law. It recognizes that all individuals should have equal opportunities to develop their talent. It does not mean the uniform application of law for all the people under all circumstances. It means equality of treatment in equal circumstances. Among equals, the law should be equal and equally administered, the like should be treated alike and different should not be treated like. Article 15, Prohibition of discrimination. 15.1. It prohibits the state from discriminating against its citizens on grounds only on religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth or area. 15.2. It states that no citizen shall be discriminated against in having access to public places like restaurants, hotels, cinema halls, wells, public roads, etc. only on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex and place of birth or area. Article 15, 2, is enforceable against individual as well as state. While Article 15, 1, and 15, 2, speak the language of equality before law, Article 15, 3, 15, 4, and 15, 5, speak the language of equal protection against law. 15, 3, it confers the power on state to make special provisions for the benefit of women and children. Sixteen. 15, 4, it was instituted in Constitution by First Constitution Amendment Act, 1951. It confers the power on state for making any special provisions for advancement of socially and educationally backward citizens including SCs and STS. State has extended reservation for backward classes in public education institutions and the private education institutions receiving aid out of state funds. 15, 5, it was introduced into the Constitution by 93rd Constitution Amendment Act, 2005. It confers the power on state to provide by law for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward class citizen for admission to educational institution including private educational institution whether aided or unaided by states other than minority educational institution. Central Educational Institution, Reservation in Admission Act, 2006 was passed under the ambit of 15, 5, to provide reservation of 27% of seats to other backward classes, OBCs, in the central universities and institutions. Article 16, Equality of Opportunity in Public Employment. 16, 1. It provides that there shall be equality of opportunity in the public employment for all citizens. 16, 2. It prohibits the state from discriminating against its citizens on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, residence and place of birth or descent. 16, 3. It confers the power on Parliament to provide by law prescribing residence as ground for qualification in certain categories of public employment. 16, 4. It confers the power on state to provide reservation of seats in favor of the backward classes who are socially and educationally backward in public employment or in the opinion of state, they are not adequately represented in public employment. 16, 4, is merely an enabling clause and does not confer a fundamental rights to reservation. In Indira Sawhney v. Union of India case, the Supreme Court held that reservation of seats up to 27% in favor of the OBCs in public employment is constitutionally valid but must satisfy the following requirements. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. Black circle backward class of citizens should be socially and educationally backward. Backward classes are not adequately represented in public employment in the opinion of government. Overall reservation in favor of backward classes should not exceed 50% in any circumstances. A concept of creamy layer shall apply in case of OBC reservation. The reservation policy overall should be consistent with the efficiency in the administration. Article 17, Abolition of Untouchability. It abolishes untouchability in all forms. It is an absolute fundamental right. It is enforceable against stale as well as individual. Parliament enacted the Untouchability Offences Act, 1955, which was later amended and renamed as Civil Rights Protection Act, 1976. It provides for stringent punishment on practicing untouchability. The Parliament has also enacted SC Saint Prevention of Atrocities Act, 1989 to safeguard the interest of SCS and STS. Article 18 Abolition of Titles. 18.1. It prohibits the state from conferring any title on any individuals, both citizens and non-citizens. However, the military and academic distinctions are exempted. Supreme Court in Balaji Raghvan versus Union of India 1996 case held that the theory of equality does not mandate that merit should not be recognized. It held that the Padma Awards are in the nature of recognizing academic distinctions and are not titles as per 18.1. 18.2. It prohibits an Indian citizen from receiving any title from any government of other nations. However, some awards are recognized in the nature of academic distinctions and are not prohibited. 18.3. It prohibits a foreigner, who is in the service of India to receive any title without the permission of President of India. Constitutional Framework. 17. 2. Right to freedom. Article 19. 19.1. It guarantees to all citizens the right to freedom of speech and expression. According to Supreme Court, it is not a single but a composite right and has following features. According to this right, a citizen can express his views and opinion freely and openly. The citizen can choose any medium to express his views and opinion, e.g. by word of mouth, writing, printing, symbols, signatures, banners, painting, etc. In Jindal versus Union of India case, the Supreme Court held that unfurling the national flag by a citizen at the top of private buildings is a form of freedom of speech and expression. It facilitates the truth by open discussion. Free speech acts as an aspect of self-fulfillment and development, and its importance increases all the more in liberal democracies. In fact, for expressing belief and political attitudes, free speech can act as catalyst. It also means the right to have access to information. Right to information has been established as a fundamental right. Supreme Court has made its ambit further wide by incorporating the right to have information about candidates in elections. It provides the right to political dissent to have an independent political opinion. 19.1b. It confers the right to assemble on all the citizens. It also includes the right to hold a meeting and take out a procession. However, the right to assembly must be for peaceful purposes and without arms. 19.1c. It confers the fundamental right to form association on all citizens. The type of association can be political, social, cultural and literal, etc. However, in light of this, the Supreme Court has held that while forming trade unions is a fundamental right, this does not mean right to strike is fundamental right, rather it is just statutory or legal right. Supreme Court in CPV versus Bharat Kumar and others 1998 case held that bandage is illegal because bandage carries an element of coercion and threatens to shut down the society. Freedom of assembly and association can be curtailed on the grounds of public order, morality, sovereignty and integrity of India. 19.1d. It extends the right to freedom of movement throughout the country to all citizens. The expression throughout means that no part of India can be made inaccessible to the citizens. The expression freely means the freedom of citizens to move whenever, wherever and howsoever they want to. The freedom to move throughout the territory of the country and to reside can be reduced in the interest of general public or the protection of the interest of any scheduled tribe. 19(1)(e). It confers on all citizens the right to residence and settlement throughout the territory of India. Right of residence means for temporary period and right of settlement is for permanent period. 19(1)(f). It provided the right to property as fundamental right to all citizens. Since it was considered as one fundamental right that came in the path of the state in implementing social legislation, providing for prevention of concentration of wealth in fewer hands, 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, 1978 removed 19(1)(f) from the list of fundamental right and made the right to property as constitutional right under Article 300A. 19(1)(g). It deals with the right to vocation of the citizens. The citizens have the freedom to choose any profession, occupation, trade or business. Likewise, the freedom to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade or business does not prevent the state from enacting laws relating to the professional or technical qualifications necessary for carrying out any occupation, trade or business or to exclude completely or partially any citizen from any trade or business, industry or service being carried on by the state or by a corporation owned or controlled by the state. (18) General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. Article 20. Like the right to equality, the right to freedom is also not absolute and therefore reasonable restrictions have been imposed on its enjoyment. Thus, the right to freedom of speech and expression can be restricted in the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India, the security of state, the friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality or in relation to contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offense. Restriction on freedom of speech and expression in India. Literary works which may incite disturbances and have the ability to defame may be restricted for publication. Wendy Doniger's book, The Hindus, An Alternative History, and The Descent of Air India, by Jitendra Bhargava, are some examples of such restrictions. Visual works like paintings, movies etc. are also banned or censored in order to control controversies, violence, problems of law and order etc. Contents of social media are regularly reviewed as it has the highest vulnerability to cause unrest. Fake videos, Instigating messages and morphed images misuse the provision of free speech. Some forms of restrictions on freedom of speech are always acceptable and justified even in the most liberal societies. For example, hate speeches to malign, defame, accusing falsely and sensational news against an individual or group must be curbed. It also includes the right of a citizen to express the views and opinions of other individuals. Right to freedom of press can be perceived through this, however, this right is subjected to reasonable restrictions that can be imposed in the interest of sovereignty, territorial integrity and security of India, for maintenance of friendly relation with foreign state, for maintenance of public order, morality and decency, in the interest of the general public in cases of defamation, contempt of court, etc. Article 20 grants protection against arbitrary and excessive punishment to accused person. It contains following three provisions. 1. No ex post facto law. No person shall be convicted of any offense except for a violation of law in force at the time of the commission of the act, subjected to a penalty greater than that prescribed by the law in force at the time of the commission of the act. 2. No double jeopardy. No person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once. 3. No self-incrimination. No person accused of any offense shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. Article 21. Article 21 declares that no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. This right is available to both citizens and non-citizens. It is the Article 21 that has undergone the greatest changes due to the liberal interpretation provided by the Supreme Court. According to the Supreme Court, Article 21 guarantees not only the right to life but the right to dignified life also. Supreme Court, in Maneka Gandhi v. Union of India, 1978 case gave a wider and liberal interpretation to Article 21 and held that expression, liberty, cannot be certified or diluted. Article 21 has gone through one of the most progressive interpretations by the Supreme Court. It has included many inferred rights under Act 21, through successive judgments, like right to privacy, health, livelihood, free legal aid, against solitary confinement, to reputation, hearing against public hanging, etc. Article 21A was introduced into the Constitution by 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, 2002. The Act also introduced the 11th fundamental duty of citizen under Article 51A(k). It states that the state shall provide free and compulsory education to all children in the age group of 6 to 14 years. Right to Education Act was enacted to implement Article 21A in 2009. Constitutional Framework. 19. Over the years, the Supreme Court of India has widened the scope of this article by asserting that right to life means right to dignified life. Now, the right to clean environment has also been made a part of right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. During Diwali and other festivals, there has been a tradition of burning crackers as a means of celebration. But these crackers result in very high level of air and noise pollution. It makes environment very unhealthy. Things are really worst for infants and elderlies. Many laws and regulations are in place to curb this practice. Some of those regulations are given as under Rule 89 of Environment Protection Rules, 1986 says that the manufacture, sale or use of firecrackers generating noise level exceeding 125 decibels at 4 meters distance from the point of bursting shall be prohibited. Rule 14 of the Explosive Rules, 2008, says that every manufacturer on the box of each tire cracker mention details of its chemical content, sound level, etc. In Prevention of Environment and Sound Pollution US Union of India Case 2005, the Supreme Court laid down following guidelines. Black Circle: there shall be complete ban on bursting crackers between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Black Circle: chemical content and other details should be mentioned at the box of crackers. Now, it depends on the judgment of people to ensure that environment remains clean and healthy during festivals. Article 22. Article 22 provides protection against arrest and detention in certain cases. It also says that no person, who has been arrested, shall be detained in custody without being informed of the ground for such arrest. To freedom under exceptional circumstances, e.g., under the Preventive Detention Act, a person can be detained on the grounds of suspicion of committing anti-national activity. 3. Right against exploitation. Article 23 prohibits trafficking in human beings, beggar and similar forms of forced labors. It makes the contravention of this provision an offense punishable in accordance with law. However, this does not prevent the state from introducing compulsory service for public purposes. But while imposing such service, the state cannot make any discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, class, or any of them. Article 24 prohibits the employment of children below the age of 14 years in hazardous employment. Therefore, Article 24 does not prohibit the employment of children in non-hazardous industries. The Children Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act, 1986, originally had declared 14 industries such as mining, chemical, slate, matchstick, firecracker, etc. as hazardous industries. In other industries, it regulates the employment of children by fixing the number of working hours, minimum wages, fixing the responsibilities of employer, and so on. In 2009, the unorganized sector, which employs the largest number of children, was also brought under the scope of the Act. The employment of children in household sectors, hotels, restaurants, etc. has also been prohibited. 4. Right to freedom of religion. Articles 25 to 28 of the Indian Constitution deal with the freedom of conscience and religion. Under Article 25, all persons are equally entitled. He shall also not be denied the right to consult and to be to freedom of conscience and right to freely defended by a legal practitioner of his choice. Each profess, practice and propagate any religion. Arrested and detained person has to be produced before subject to the public order, morality and health. The nearest magistrate within a period of 24 hours of the state also enjoys the right to restrict any such arrest and cannot be kept in custody beyond that economic, social, political or other activities which may be associated with the religious practice. Period. Without the authority of magistrate. The Constitution, however, permits the state to curb the right. Coordinates and promotes research in the fields of Ayurveda and Siddha medicine. Also, the Central Council of 2020. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. According to Article 25, the right to profess means the right to spell out one's religious beliefs and faith and follow one's religion freely and openly. The right to practice means the right to follow the rituals, rites that are prescribed by his/her religion, and right to display or use the symbols, signatures and colors that are associated with one's religion. The right to propagate means to spread out one's religious tenets and philosophy for educating others. According to Supreme Court, Reverend Father Stanislaus versus State of MP case, fundamental right to propagate one's religion by explaining its tenets cannot be questioned, but it does not confer right to convert to one's own religion. Any religious conversion has to be voluntary, and it cannot be through coercion or other unlawful means. All persons have also been granted the right to establish institutions for religious and charitable purposes, manage their own affairs, and to own, acquire and administer movable and immovable property related to religious institutions. Article 26 provides the freedom to manage religious affairs, subject to public order, morality and health, in which every religious denomination or any section thereof shall have the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes. B. To manage its own affairs in matters of religion. C. To own and acquire movable and immovable property, and D. To administer such property in accordance with law. Article 27 deals with freedom as to payment of taxes for promotion of any particular religion. According to it, no person shall be compelled to pay any taxes, the proceeds of which are specifically appropriated in payment of expenses for the promotion or maintenance of any particular religion or religious denomination. Article 28 deals with freedom as to attendance at religious instruction or religious worship in certain educational institutions. But it includes following guidelines. A. No religious instruction shall be provided in any educational institution wholly maintained out of state funds. B. Nothing in Clause 1 shall apply to an educational institution which is administered by the state but has been established under any endowment or trust which requires that religious instruction shall be imparted in such institution. C. No person attending any educational institution recognized by the state or receiving aid out of state funds shall be required to take part in any religious instruction that may be imparted in such institution or in any premises attached thereto, unless such person, or, if such person is a minor, his guardian has given his consent thereto. 5. Cultural and educational rights. Article 29 can be summarized as the right to conserve. It says that any section of the citizens residing in any part of India having a distinctive language, script, or culture of its own, shall have the right to conserve the same. Article 30 refers to the rights of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions. The article grants the following rights to minorities, linguistic or religious. A. No discrimination by the state in granting aid to educational institutions managed by minorities. B. Right to property as a fundamental right is still applicable to these institutions. 6. Right to constitutional remedies. Last but not the least, the Constitution itself grants right to constitutional remedies to the citizens. This right has been described by Dr. Ambedkar as the heart and soul of the Constitution. In fact, the Declaration of Fundamental Rights is useless unless effective remedies are available for their enforcement. This has been ensured under Article 32, which grants all individuals the right to move to the Supreme Court by appropriate proceedings for the enforcement of the rights conferred by the Constitution. Right to approach Supreme Court is itself a fundamental right. The Supreme Court has been vested with the authority to issue directions, orders, or writs, whichever may be appropriate for the enforcement of any of the rights conferred by the Constitution. The Parliament can also confer similar power on other courts. 1970s to 2005, Indian space program had suffered insignificantly due to the constitutional framework. 21. Under Article 32, the Supreme Court can issue the writs only for the implementation of fundamental rights and not for any other legal right. Whereas, under Article 226, the High Court can issue the writs not only for the implementation of fundamental rights but also other legal rights. Under Article 32, the Supreme Court is under a constitutional obligation to safeguard fundamental rights if they are found violated. It does not have the discretionary power to refuse to implement the fundamental rights. On the other hand, the High Courts under Article 226 have no such constitutional duties and thus they enjoy the discretionary power to implement or not to implement the fundamental rights and other legal rights. In both the above cases, the writ jurisdiction of High Court is wider than that of the Supreme Court. However, in terms of territorial extent, the writ jurisdiction of Supreme Court is wider as it extends to the whole of India. The writ jurisdiction of the High Court is limited to the respective states and union territories. Suspension of fundamental rights. The fundamental rights guaranteed under the Indian Constitution can be suspended by the President during emergency arising out of threat to the security of India or any part of its territory or due to actual external aggression. It may be noted that the President has to issue specific order for the suspension of the fundamental rights and such orders must be placed before the Parliament at the earliest possible. The President of India can also suspend the right to move to the court for the enforcement of these fundamental rights except the rights available under Articles 20 and 21. When such orders have been issued, the state has the authority to make any law or take any executive action with regard to the fundamental rights. But such law shall, to the extent of incompetency, cease to have effect as soon as the order aforesaid ceases to operate. It may be noted that in other democratic countries like USA, the fundamental rights of the citizens cannot be suspended even during emergency. No wonder, these provisions of the Constitution met with severe criticism at the hands of some of the members of the Constituent Assembly. E.g.H. V. Kamat strongly opposed the inclusion of this provision in the Constitution and expressed the fear that the executive may exploit this provision to impose the dictatorship on the people. But by and large, the members favored the incorporation of this provision in the Constitution, keeping in view the national interest. They argued that the interest of country must get precedence over the individual interest and there was no question of fundamental rights for the individual when the very existence of a country was at stake. They further argued that these were exceptional provisions to deal with the exceptional circumstances. Evaluation of fundamental rights. Difference of opinion exists amongst scholars regarding the significance of the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. On the one hand, there are critics who argue that the Constitution does not make any mention of some of the vital fundamental rights like right to work, etc. On the other hand, it is argued that the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution are more real and genuine, even though they are not absolute. It shall be desirable to examine these views in some details. The chief points of criticism against the fundamental rights are as follows. Some of the economical and social rights, which are available to the citizens of advanced democratic countries, do not find any place in a list of fundamental rights. While this charge seems valid, we have to keep in mind socio-economic conditions of the country. In view of the limited resources available in the country, the framers of the Constitution could not think to incorporate these fundamental rights in the Constitution. Differences in the writ jurisdiction of High Court and Supreme Court. Achievements of Indians in Science and Technology. 315. Prithvi Missile System is a family of tactical surface-to-surface short-range ballistic missile, SRBM, developed by DRDO. 2222. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. The framers of the Constitution therefore incorporated the economic and social rights in the chapter on directive principles of the state policy so that these rights may be available to the citizens at later stage, when the country would be in a position to give them a practical shape. Limitations of fundamental rights. The fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution have been hedged by so many restrictions and limitations that they virtually become ineffective. The scholars make a reference to the American Constitution, which does not impose any restriction or limitation on the fundamental rights. However, it cannot be denied that even in USA the fundamental rights are not absolute and numerous restrictions have been imposed on them through congressional laws and Supreme Court judgments. In India, not only the parliament and the judiciary can impose restrictions on fundamental rights, but the Constitution itself also contains elaborate restrictions. The remedies available for the protection of fundamental rights are very expensive and beyond the capacity of ordinary citizens. As a result, only well-off people can seek legal protection against the violation of the fundamental rights. Though the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution are very extensive, but they are subject to many restrictions, most of the criticisms against these fundamental rights have been due to these restrictions. However, it has to be admitted that absolute rights are not possible in any civilized society, and certain restrictions must be placed on them so that these can be made available to all the citizens. Finally, we can conclude by saying that under the circumstances in which the Constitution was framed, we could hardly expect a more comprehensive list of fundamental rights. There are certain limitations, but they can be justified. However, provisions regarding suspension of fundamental rights could have been avoided. They are liable to be abused. In fact, they have been misused and abused in the past, though occasionally. Significance of fundamental rights. In spite of the criticism and shortcomings, the fundamental rights are significant in the following respects. They constitute the base of democratic system in the country. They provide necessary conditions for the material and moral protection of man. They serve as a formidable bulwark of individual liberty. They facilitate the establishment of rule of law in the country. They protect the interests of minorities and weaker sections of society. They strengthen the secular fabric of the Indian state. They check the absoluteness of the authority of the government. They lay down the foundation stone of social equality and social justice. Black circle. They ensure the dignity and respect of individuals. Directive Principles of State Policy, DPSP. The DPSPs have been mentioned in Part 4 of the Constitution. The directive principles mean certain aims which are to be fulfilled by the future governments. The framers of our Constitution have borrowed these principles from the Irish Constitution. These principles are not justiciable. It means that there is no legal force behind these principles. But it does not mean that these principles are useless. These principles have a great moral value. They serve as the touchstone for the government. According to K.C. Ware, these are the manifestation of aims and aspirations of the people of India. Though there is no legal force behind these principles, no government ignores them. According to the 44th Amendment, the state shall, in particular, strive to minimize the inequalities of income and endeavor to eliminate inequalities in status, facilities and opportunities not only amongst individuals, but also amongst groups of people residing in different areas or engaged in different professions. Launched ballistic missile, SLBM, named K-15 Savarika. India is only the fifth country to have such a missile. The other four are the US, Russia, France and China. Constitutional Framework 23. Classification of DPSPs. The DPSPs are listed in the Part 4 of the Constitution in Articles 36 to 51. These principles have not been enumerated in any planned manner. It is difficult to classify them on any scientific basis. Dr. M.P. Sharma classified all the directive principles into the following categories: the socialist principles, the Gandhian principles, the liberal intellectual principles, international principles, the socialist principles. The following principles aim at socio-economic justice. These principles are: the state shall promote the welfare of the people by securing a social order permeated by social, economic and political justice and to minimize inequalities in income, status, facilities and opportunities. Article 38. The state shall direct its policy towards securing the citizens, men and women's, equal right to an adequate means of livelihood. Article 39. The ownership and control of the natural resources of the community shall be so distributed as best to subserve a common goal. Article 39(b). The economic system shall not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment. Article 39(c). There shall be equal pay for equal work for both men and women. Article 39(d). The health and strength of workers, men and women and the tender-aged children must not be abused. Article 39(e). The state shall, within the limits of its economic capacity and development, make effective provision for securing the right to work, to education and to public assistance in case of employment, old age, sickness and disablement and in other cases of undeserved want. Article 41. The state shall make provisions for securing just and humane conditions of work and maternity relief. Article 42. The state shall endeavor to secure all workers a living wage in such conditions of work so as to ensure a decent standard of life, full enjoyment of leisure and social and cultural opportunities. Article 43. The state shall take steps by suitable legislations or in any other way to secure the participation of workers in the management of undertakings, establishment or other organizations engaged in any industry. Article 43(a). Gandhian Principles. The Gandhian principles include the following: to organize village panchayats as units of self-government. Article 40. To promote collage industries on an individual and cooperative basis in rural areas. Article 43. To promote with special care educational and economic interest of the weaker section of the people, especially the SCs and STS. Article 46. To bring about the prohibition of intoxicating drinks and of drugs that are injurious to health. Article 47. To preserve and improve breeds of the cattle, prohibit slaughter of cows, calves and other milk and drought animals. Article 48. To organize agriculture and animal husbandry on modern and scientific lines. These principles aim at achievement of a welfare society. Article 48. Liberal principles. The directive principles mentioned in this category call upon the state to secure for all humans a uniform civil code. Article 44. To provide within 10 years free and compulsory education for children up to the age of 14. Article 45. To take steps to secure separation of judiciary from the executive and public services of the state. Article 50. To raise the standard of nutrition and also of health. Article 47. To organize agriculture on scientific lines. Article 48. To preserve the historical monuments. Article 49. This led Homi Bhabha to conceive a three-stage nuclear power program for efficient exploitation of available resources unique to India. The sequential three-stage program was based on the closed fuel cycle, where the spent fuel of one stage is reprocessed. 2424. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. International Principles. The DirecTV principles also provide guidelines to state for the formation of its international policy and behavior. Article 51 says that the state shall try to promote international peace and security. The state shall maintain friendly relation with other states. The state shall solve its disputes by peaceful means like arbitration. The state shall create respect for international law and treaties. Importance of DPSPs as moral ideals. The directive principles are not absolutely useless. They have their significance and utility even though they're old-fashioned with a 19th century ring around them. Gledhill in his book, The Republic of India observes, it would be superficial to discuss these precepts as good resolutions put only joy paving stones on the broad and primrose-strewn way. The lives of countless individuals have been shaped by moral precepts impinging upon their minds, and it is not difficult to find the instances of similar precepts directing the course of history of nation. Basis of the welfare state. The directive principles are very significant in view of the fact that they lay the cornerstone of a welfare state. Economic conditions and thoughts are ever changing, and these need to keep on incorporated in the government's action. If the principles had not been rigid, the ruling parties might have changed them merely on their whims. Envisioning these, the framers of Constitution prepared only the skeleton of economic policies in the form of directive principles of state policies and left for the future governments to give it shape as per need of the day. Beacon to the courts. Although the directive principles cannot be enforced by the courts, they serve as ideals for the judges and influence their interpretation of laws. Since they are included in the Constitution as they are accepted as the guiding principles of state policy, they have both sanctity and constitutional force. They are sure to affect indirectly the attitude of the judges at the time of interpreting the laws. The DPSPs are part of Constitution and they form the social, economic and political ideals of the nation. The directive principles impart a sort of continuity in our national policies. When the government or executive of the day imposes certain restrictions upon the fundamental rights, the courts have to decide in the light of DPSPS whether the restrictions imposed upon the fundamental rights are reasonable or not, whether they are in the public interest or not. Constitutional importance of DPSP. The liberal principles in Indian Constitution form an essential background for all state actions. Simply because they are not enforceable by court, they do not become meaningless. Any state policy in contravention of any of the DPSPs will be considered as much unconstitutional as the violation of fundamental right. Assertion of noble principles. According to M.C. Sorowad, former Attorney General of India, although the DPSPS confirm no legal right and creare no legal remedies, they appear to be like an instrument of instructions or general recommendations addressed to all authorities in the Union, reminding them of basic principles of the new social and economic order. which the Constitution aims at building. The directive principles are an amplification of the preamble of the Indian Constitution, which resolved to secure to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality of status and of opportunity and promotion among them all of fraternity, assuring the dignity of individual and unity of the nation. Real sanction behind DPSPs. The real sanction behind these principles is the vigilant public opinion. Though these directive principles are not enforced by the courts like fundamental rights, the people will judge the performance of every political party in the light of the performance of the implementation of the DPSPS. Though the public opinion is the main force behind the directive principles, yet the effectiveness of these principles shall really depend upon the political education of the Indian people. In 1971, the main objective of conducting broad-based multidisciplinary program of scientific research and advanced engineering, directed towards the development of sodium-cooled fast breeder reactor, FBR technology in India. Constitutional framework. 25. Implementation of directive principles. The founding fathers of the Constitution had desired that the future government in the country, irrespective of their political complexion, would try to implement the DPSPS to establish a true social, economic and political democracy in the county. But our governments have failed to show any satisfactory progress in the implementation of the directive principles. Initially, the government appeared quite keen to implement them, as evident from the 5-year plans and abolition of zamindari system. Some other examples of DPSP implementation can be discussed as below. Women were given equal right in property. The insurance business and the banks were nationalized to enable the state to control capital in the interest of the common man. Panchayats have been established in most part of the country and the cottage industries have been encouraged. The executive and judiciary have been generally separated. India has always tried for peaceful settlements of international disputes. It is true that many important changes have taken place in pursuance of the DPSPs in the social and economic system of the country, but that does not mean the ideals of the welfare state or economic democracy have been achieved in totality. Main factors which inhibit the implementation of Uniform Civil Code are given as under. As it is a part of DPSPs, it lacks legal enforceability. In India, the socio-religious cohesiveness is very fragile. Any attempt to implement universal civil code may be seen as an attempt of subversion of minority religious communities. Lack of modern and progressive education forces people to believe in religions, traditions and rituals. It undermines acceptability of modern ideas like uniform civil code. Black circle political immaturity coupled with vote bank politics hampers passing of such a legislation. The religious connotation attached to such liberal, progressive ideas is the biggest hindrance in the implementation of Uniform Civil Code. Even the Supreme Court of India has emphasized the importance of bringing in Uniform Civil Code. The sooner it gets implemented, the better it is for the unity of India. Criticism of the directive principles. The following factors show the critical approach towards the directive principles. No legal force. The directives have been criticized mainly because of their non-justiciable character. K.T. Shah dubbed them as pious superfluities, and compared them with a check on a bank, payable only when the resources of the bank permit. Even T.T. Krishnachari described the directives as a veritable dustbin of sentiments. Uniform Civil Code. The Constitution of India provides for a uniform civil code across the country under Article 44 under Part 4 La Directive Principles of State Policy. The Uniform Civil Code provides for uniformity in personal laws across the religion, class, creed, etc. in matters of marriage, divorce, succession, inheritance and adoption. More than 65 years have been passed, but there is no sign of implementation of Uniform Civil Code in India. The Special Marriage Act was passed in 1955, but its acceptability remains only for inter-caste and inter-religion marriages. Illogically arranged critics opine that the directives are not arranged in a logical manner based on a consistent philosophy. According to N. Srinivasan, the directives are neither properly classified nor logically arranged. The declaration mixes up relatively unimportant issues with the most vital economic and social questions. It combines the modern with the old in provisions suggested by the reason and science with provisions based purely on sentiments and prejudices. NPCIL is responsible for design, construction, commissioning, and operation of nuclear power reactors. 2. Indian Rare Earth Limited, IREL. On the 18th of August 1950, it was incorporated as a private limited company jointly owned by the Government of India and Government of Travancore, Kochi, with the primary intention of taking up commercial 26. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. Conservative. According to Sir Ivor Jennings, the directives are based on the political philosophy of the 19th century England. Part 4 of the Constitution expresses Fabian socialism without the socialism. He opined that the directives are deemed to be suitable in India in middle of the 20th century. The question, whether they are suitable for the 21st century, cannot be answered properly. Constitutional conflict. The DPSPs may lead to a constitutional conflict between the center and the states, between the president and the prime minister, and between the governor and the chief minister. Evaluation of DPSPs. While making an evaluation of implementation of DPSPs, we should remember that the government has to function under several limitations. The government has to function under circumstances which make it difficult for the government to implement all the DPSPs. Paucity of funds is a major hindrance. A vast population are illiterate. It was impossible to introduce compulsory and free education within 10 years from the commencement of Constitution. In spite of the development of cottage industries, the development of heavy industries can't be ignored. We need them to find employment for the ever-growing population and for rapid economic development of the country. Prohibition of liquor cannot be effectively introduced because those who are in the habits of drinking secretly go in for illegally and unscientifically manufactured liquor. This practice very often kills people. Article 44 promises uniform civil code for the whole country. It has not been possible to have such an uniform code because it seems impossible to carry different communities and sections of people together. We do not have a totalitarian system. The state cannot compel people to accept everything that is in their interest. Money is a big problem, but the real hurdle in the way of many of DPSPs are orthodox way of life, illiteracy, and religious and communal sentiments. Conservative Orthodox people will not easily accept a common civil code or even compulsory education for everyone. Relation between DPSPs and fundamental rights. The directive principles differ from fundamental rights in the respect that while fundamental rights are justiciable, DPSPs are non-justiciable. According to Article 37, the directive principles are fundamental in the governance of the country, and it shall be the duty of the state to apply these principles in making law, but they are expressly made non-justiciable. On the other hand, fundamental rights are enforceable by the courts, Article 32, and the courts are bound to declare any law as void that is inconsistent with the fundamental rights. In State of Madras versus Champakkam Dorarajan case, It was held that in case of any conflict between fundamental rights and directive principles, the fundamental rigis would prevail. But a year later, in the case of State of Bihar versus Kameshwar Singh, the court relied on Article 39 in deciding a Zamindari Abolition Act had that been passed for a public purpose within the meaning of Article 31. Finally, in Kerala Education Bill, the Supreme Court observed that though the directive principles cannot override the fundamental rights, nevertheless, in determining the scope and ambit of fundamental rights, the courts may not entirely ignore the directive principles, but should adopt the principles of harmonious construction and should attempt to give effect to both as much as possible. While Part 3 of the bill contains negative injunctions to the state not to do various things, Part 4 contains positive commands to the state to promote what may be called a social and welfare state. Thus, although in earlier decisions the court paid less regard to the DPSPS on the ground that they are not justiciable like the fundamental rights, but in its later decisions the court has taken the view that there is no conflict between the directive principles and the fundamental rights and they supplement each other. Heavy hydrogen or deuterium, D, and oxygen. This is also known as deuterium oxide. Deuterium has an atomic mass of 2, as against 1 for normal hydrogen, H. Due to presence of an extra neutron in the nucleus, deuterium is present in hydrogen. Constitutional Framework 27. In view of this, the courts have the responsibility to interpret the provisions of the Constitution in such a way so as to ensure the implementation of the directive principles and to harmonize the social objectives underlying the directives with the individual rights. Though these directives are not enforceable by the courts, these principles have been declared to be fundamental in the governance of the country. Article 37. It is the duty of the state to apply these principles in making laws. If any government ignores them, they will certainly have to answer before the electorate at the time of election. It is, therefore, not correct to criticize these principles as meaningless and useless. It is wrong to say that there is no sanction behind them. In this age of democracy, vigilant public opinion is the real force behind an institution which stands for the benefit of the individual. Since the directive principles have been embodied in the Constitution, the governments are bound to implement them. There may not be legal force behind them, but the highest tribunal of public opinion stand behind them. There is no contrast between the fundamental rights and the directive principles. They are meant to supplement one another. Austin has described the fundamental rights and the directive principles as the conscience of our conscience. The directive principles are also relevant to consider what are reasonable restrictions under Article 19. Article 19 permits the imposition of reasonable restrictions on the fundamental rights. A restriction which promotes any objective embodied in the directive principles is usually considered reasonable by courts of law. Thus, in the State of Bombay versus Balsara case, the Supreme Court gave weightage to Article 47, which directs the state to bring about prohibition of consumption of intoxicating drinks except for the medical purposes to support its decision that the restriction imposed by the Bombay Prohibition Act was a reasonable restriction on the right to engage in any profession or carry on any trade. Differences between fundamental rights and DPSPS. Fundamental rights and DPSPS differ from each other though both aim at the welfare of the people. They are different as following. FRS are negative, but DPSPs are positive. The FRS are some negative directions backed by the legal force. On the other hand, DPSPs are positive instructions for the welfare of the people. FRS could be amended to enforce the DPSPS. The DPSPs had been given priority over FRS. The Parliament could amend the FRS to implement the DPSPS. FRS are definite, but DPSPS are not as definite. The FRS are clear, definite and accurately explained, whereas the DPSPs are vague principles. These principles have not been elaborated in the Constitution. FRs are justiciable and DPSPs are not justiciable. The FRS are legally enforceable by courts. Their violation involves legal punishment. On the other hand, DPSPs have no legal force behind them. They are not enforceable by the court. FRs set up political democracy, but DPSPs set up economic democracy. The FRS grant political freedom to the people, whereas DPSPs are mainly for improving the economic condition of the people. FRS are available to the people, but DPSPs are yet to be achieved. The FRS have already been achieved and people are enjoying them, whereas, on the other hand, the DPSPs are yet to be achieved by the government. Fundamental duties. The 42nd Amendment has added a new feature to the Constitution by introducing Article 51A, which enumerates the fundamental duties of the citizens. The feeling that, as a people, we are more inclined to think of our individual rights than to care for our obligations to the community was widely shared. However, the enumeration of fundamental duties in the Constitution can also be seen as the formal acceptance of the traditional concept of Dharma. Mahatma Gandhi gave the expression to this traditional value when he defined a knight as duty well performed. The incorporation of fundamental duties in the Constitution was, thus, an attempt to balance the individual's civic freedoms with his civic obligations and thus, to fill a serious gap in the Constitution. Some facts about nuclear power. It is the fourth largest source of electricity in India after thermal, hydroelectric and renewable source of electricity. At present, India has 22 nuclear reactors in operation. 28. General Studies, Mains, Paper 2. The new Article 51A requires the citizens to black circle respect the Constitution, the national flag and the national anthem. Cherish the noble ideals of the freedom struggle. Uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India. Defend the country and render national service when called. Black Circle promote the common brotherhood of the people of India and renounce any practice derogatory to the dignity of women. Black Circle preserve the rich heritage of the nation's composite culture. Protect the natural environment and have compassion for living creatures. Develop scientific temper, humanism and spirit of inquiry and reform. Safeguard public property and abjure violence. Strive for excellence in all individual and collective activities. In Black Circle provide opportunities for education to children between the age of 6 and 14 years. It was added by 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, 2002. Swaran Singh Committee recommendations. In 1976, the Congress Party set up the Sardar Swaran Singh Committee to make recommendations about fundamental duties. The committee recommended the inclusion of a separate chapter on fundamental duties in the Constitution. It stressed that the citizens should become conscious that in addition to the enjoyment of rights, they also have certain duties to perform as well. The Congress government at center accepted these recommendations and enacted the 42nd Amendment Act in 1976. Though, the Swaran Singh Committee suggested the incorporation of 8 fundamental duties in the Constitution, the 42nd Amendment Act, 1976, included 10 fundamental duties. Enforcement of fundamental duties. The duties incorporated in the Constitution by the 42nd Amendment are statutory duties and shall be enforceable by law. Parliament, by law, will provide penalties to be imposed for failure to fulfill those duties and obligations. The success of this provision would, however, depend much upon the manner in which these duties would be enforced. In MC Mehta versus Union of India case, Supreme Court has held that under Article 51A, G, it is the duty of the central government to introduce compulsory teaching of lessons at least for 1 hour in a week on protection and improvement of natural environment in all the educational institutions of the country. It directed the central government to get textbooks written on that subject and distribute them to the educational institutions free of cost. Significance of fundamental duties. While the general principles reflected in these fundamental duties are unexceptionable, it is to be noted that they have not been made enforceable by law. This seems to be the reason why they have been added to the chapter on DPSP. As directive principles are in the nature of directives addressed to the citizens, both are fundamental and at the same time, not enforceable. In its report, the Swaran Singh Committee had envisaged legal sanctions for the citizens' duties. It had suggested that Parliament by law provide for the imposition of punishments for non-compliance or refusal to observe the duties. It recommended further that no law imposing such penalty or punishment should be called in question in any court on the ground of repugnancy to any other provision of the Constitution. On closer examination, it was found that the enforcement of some of the duties would be problematic. E.g., can the duties pertaining to upholding the noble ideals of the freedom struggle, or the development of scientific temper and humanism and spirit of inquiry and reform, or striving for excellence, be enforced by law, and what penalties can be prescribed for non-performance of these duties? It seems that the real purpose behind such incorporation of a set of duties in the Constitution was to project a system of norms which would, in due course, help change established attitudes, generate new ones, and create a psychological climate conducive to the development of alert, informed and dedicated citizenship. The reactor at Kalpakkam was completed in 2012. 3. Thorium-based reactor. A Stage 3 reactor or an advanced nuclear power system involves a self-sustaining series of thorium-232, uranium-232. Constitutional framework. 29. It has also been said that if a set of duties was to be included in the Constitution, it is suggested that several other obligations such as the duty to work, the duty to be disciplined, the duty to pay taxes, the duty to vote, etc. should also have been written into the Constitution. Further, it is printed out that it is not enough to enumerate the duties of citizens without making reference to the duties of public authorities, both political and administrative. Otherwise, as a way to put it, the citizens will have only duties and no rights, while the rulers will have only rights and no duties. Cranks have said that without appropriate legal sanctions, fundamental duties will remain mere moral precepts and will have no more practical value than a code of conduct. It may be noted that some of the duties, e.g. the renunciation of practices derogatory to the dignity of women, involve overaction. Legal penalties can evidently be devised. In fact, some legal provisions already exist for activities inconsistent with such duties. For the proper enforcement of duties, it is necessary that the duties should be known to all. This should be done by a systematic and intensive education of the people, that is by publicity or by making it a part of the syllabi and curriculum of education. Features of the fundamental duties. Some of the important characteristics of the fundamental duties are as follows. Some of them are moral duties while others are civic duties. For instance, Cherishing noble ideals of freedom struggle is a moral precept, and respecting the Constitution, national flag and national anthem is a civic duty. They refer to such values which have been a part of the Indian tradition, mythology, religions and practices. In other words, they essentially contain just a codification of tasks integral to the Indian way of life. Unlike some of the fundamental rights which extend to all persons whether citizens or foreigners, the fundamental duties are confined to citizens only and do not extend to foreigners. Like the DPSPs, the fundamental duties are also non-justiciable. The Constitution does not provide for their direct enforcement by the courts. Moreover, there is no legal sanction against their violation. Criticism of fundamental duties. The fundamental duties mentioned in Part 4A of the Constitution have been criticized on the following grounds. The list of duties is not exhaustive as it does not cover other important duties like casting vote, paying taxes, family planning and so on. In fact, duty to pay taxes was recommended by the Swaran Singh Committee. Some of the duties are vague, ambiguous and difficult to be understood by the common man. E.g., different interpretations can be given to the phrases like noble ideas, composite culture, scientific temper and so on. They have been described by the critics as a code of moral precepts due to their non-justiciable character. Interestingly, the Swaran Singh Committee had suggested for penalty or punishment for the non-performance of fundamental duties. Their inclusion in the Constitution was described by the critics as superfluous. This is because the duties included in the Constitution as fundamental would be performed by the people even though they were not incorporated in the Constitution. Maintain a chain reaction producing a steady flow of neutrons generated by the fission of heavy nuclei.